Hello, everybody. Welcome to Fill the Glass. I'm Kerry Millsap. Today, I'm going to tell you a little software design story about my company's flagship software product called Method R Workbench. I have the workbench open here, and I'm going to have the slides in front of it. So hopefully this will all work out. There's enough screen real estate for you to see okay. The story starts with Nancy, who's not here yet, but I'm betting she will be in a minute. Running Method R Workbench version 9.2.4, which is the current production release. It was released, I believe, in July of 2022, and we're getting ready to release again soon, partly because of what I'm going to show you today. But the way that the workbench works, and I've got the workbench showing up here so you can see it, is you basically you load files, and a couple of sample files will be sufficient for the demo here. And then you choose an action. You can either click up here to open a file, or you can choose an action down here that you'd like to execute upon some files. And if I were to choose, for example, this duration by call name for a given SQL ID value, it populates a command in this little command widget here that runs the action that's described by these words. So this Mr. Skew command has a minus where option that it's fairly obvious what's going on here, that we want to see things in a report only for which the SQL ID is equal to a certain value. And there's a lot of detail here that we don't need to cover. But the main thing I want you to know is that when you select something from this action pane, a command will show up here. And some of these commands are really complicated and long, and that's exactly why we have this particular mechanism. So you don't have to remember all this stuff. You can just select something by name and get, oh, yeah, that's how I do that. So that's what happens when you select an action from the action pane. It defines a command, like, for example, Mr. Skew, where SQL ID is equal to some value. Now, when you check a box up here, and by the way, you can't run this. If I were to click on the go button, nothing happens. And that's because no files have been selected to use as input for this particular command. So once we select a file, keep your attention right here. When I select a file, that button gets hot, and now I can run this command on that file. And of course, if I want to select all the files, I can click on this button here at the top, which will select or deselect everything. And so that's fine. Whenever I do this, it doesn't show up here, but when I run this report now, what you'll see, let me run something that I don't have to have a value for. What you'll see is that the workbench will actually report the command that it ran, and you can see here that at the end of the command, it actually appended the names of two files. There's one of them, there's the other. And that's cool. So you check a box, the command line gets longer, it appends names of files to the command that was in the command text widget. So that's all well and good. But Nancy's problem was this. She had 2,700 boxes checked. That's right. She had 2,700 files in the files pane. You think, well, how in the world would you ever get that many files in the files pane? And the answer is, well, you've got a whole directory full of files. And I've got one called connection pool that has 67 trace files in it. And when I drag it over, the 67 trace files load, and it only takes a little bit. You can see that there are a lot of files in the files pane now, 69, I'm sorry. Oh, it's because I had two sample files there already. So there's 69 files here, and to check them all I have to do is that. And when I check them all, well, more to the point, when Nancy checked them all, she's got 2,700 boxes checked, and the command line becomes the same thing, except it tries to put 2,699 more file names on the command line. And well, 2,700 file names, and by the way, each of these, like the one you see here, is about 100 bytes. So if you have 2,700 file names and they're 100 bytes a piece, that's 270 kilobytes. Well, the problem is that on Microsoft Windows, the command line length is limited to 8,191 bytes. So you can't put 270K in a data structure that only allows 8K. So this is a problem. And to recap the problem is the command line isn't big enough. So Nancy had to do all sorts of things like try to shorten the file names, like copy them to a directory where the directory name's not so long, and maybe she can process twice as many by doing that. And then she probably cut up the 2,700 files into maybe, 500 files and 500 more and 500 more and 500 more and 500 more and then 200 more at the end. Who knows? But it was inconvenience, the bottom line. The command line's not big enough to hold all the input file names, so it's a problem. So the solution that Jeff and I came up with was kind of a fun story, and that's why we're here today. What we decided that we needed was a new option. So when we run the commands like Mr. Skew, Mr. Crop, Mr. LS, Mr. Win, and so forth, we wanted an option, minus something, that we could specify the name of a file. The file contains itself a list of file names. So we could put 2,700 file names in a file called X. And then if we say Mr. Skew minus something equals X, then we can make Mr. Skew read the files listed in the file called X and basically execute upon those files without having to send a 270 kilobyte command line to the operating system. So command reads file names from the file. So that's the solution we came up with. And then we started thinking, well, okay, that's fine, but what should we call this option? What should something really be called? And we thought of a number of ideas. We thought, well, should it be like file minus file equals file name? Should it be minus read from equals something? Minus input equals minus include equals? And there was like a bell ringing, like something that we've used before does this. Is it tar? Is it zip? Is it find? And we never did find it. We never did find the thing, the Linux utility that does this. And you may be sitting there bursting with, oh, I know what it is. I know what it is. Don't tell me, because we don't need it anymore. If you know, I mean, I'm curious, obviously, but if you happen to know, tell me after the show today. I'm vaguely curious. But the reason it rang a bell is because we realized all of a sudden in a meeting sitting here at this desk that we already have an option like this. We have an option called RC minus RC equals file. And here's what it does. It processes lines in file as if they were listed on the command line. Like, that's exactly what we need. It's perfectly, exactly, precisely what we need. So here's what's in the manual page already. And this is an excerpt from the Mr. Skew man page. It says some stuff about when to use an RC file, but it says you can also use an RC file to store complicated options that you code carefully one time and then reuse. So for example, if we had a file called Mr. Skew-buckets.rc, then we could say Mr. Skew minus RC equals Mr. Skew buckets.rc. And all this stuff here will get basically pushed onto the command line for us without us having to type it every single time we run the command. So we can make fairly complicated programs. And this one is a histogram. Well, we can put command line options in an RC file, obviously. We can also put file names in an RC file. We don't have to change the code at all. We don't have to change how Mr. Skew works at all. It already takes a file named, RC equal minus RC equals some F. And if F has in it 2,700 file names, then Mr. Skew is going to run upon those 2,700 file names. So it's really cool. We didn't have to change the code in the commands at all. Well, we made sure that each command honors the RC equals file. Mr. Skew, Mr. Win, lots of things did already. But I think Mr. Crop, Mr. Prof didn't really. This was on our list of something to do later. But we accelerated that, and the products all the commands honor the RC equals file syntax. And then now when you execute an action, the Workbench app no longer appends a list of files to the command. Instead, it creates a temp file, which contains the file list. So whatever boxes Nancy checked up here, those file names go onto the list. And then the app appends minus RC equals temp file to the command in the command widget right here. So you end up seeing the exact same thing. If we ran Mr. Skew on 2,700 input files, you would see all 2,700 names right here. You can copy it and paste it into VI if you want to mess with it. That's all well and good. That's how the Workbench works nowadays. That's the story. So if you need a hand or know somebody who does, we have software training and coaching services to help you make things faster. If you're interested in Method R Workbench, let me know. Just hit info@methodr.com. If you're interested in joining Fill the Glass, which is a little show that is performed live in front of a distributed audience on Zoom, just visit methodr.com/subscribe.